the surgeon who dissected himself alive, and took note. Dr. Emil Hartmann was the kind of man who smiled more in autopsy rooms than at dinner tables. Renowned across the continent as a medical genius, he had dissected over 2,000 cadavers and had invented several procedures still used in hospitals today. But those who worked with him noticed strange behaviors over the years: how he sometimes spoke to the bodies as if they were still alive, how he refused to let assistants take notes during certain operations, and how he insisted on operating alone in the dead of night, murmuring things under his breath no one could ever quite make out. His hands, impossibly steady, never trembled even during the most delicate cranial dissections. But his eyes, a pale, icy gray, had a permanent sheen of vacancy, as though his mind hovered somewhere just behind the curtain of flesh. He published volumes on surgical precision, pain thresholds, nerve behavior. But his last work was never published. It was whispered about, passed around in medical circles as a rumor too grotesque to be real. They said he had written a final set of observations, not on a cadaver or a patient, but on himself. It began with a letter to the hospital board in Vienna, stating his intention to pursue anatomical comprehension through the elimination of intermediary variables. No one understood it, and most assumed it was just another one of his eccentric proposals. But he stopped showing up for lectures. He declined surgeries. He sealed off his private home laboratory and dismissed his staff. A week later, a courier delivered a package to the hospital's pathology department. Inside was a single leather-bound notebook, soaked through with dried blood, stitched shut with surgical thread. It reeked of antiseptic and something much darker, something organic and wrong. Attached was a note, to be read only by those who have touched death with bare hands. The notebook was eventually opened by Dr. Alara Voss, a young pathologist who had idolized Hartmann. What she found inside was a horror that eclipsed anything found in a medical journal or textbook. The first page was neat, almost elegant in its form. Day 1, incision initiated. Beneath it, a detailed account of a surgical procedure was written in clinical language. At first, it appeared to be a standard description of an abdominal dissection, until she read the line, "I began with the linea alba to minimize bleeding, though my hands protested violently against my intent." As she turned the pages, the descriptions became more vivid, and more horrifying. Hartmann had dissected himself, piece by piece, under the belief that only through experiencing the body from within could one understand its secrets. He had administered a custom cocktail of paralytics and stimulants to numb the pain while keeping his mind lucid. He documented everything: the texture of his own muscle tissue, the scent of blood as it oozed from freshly cut flesh, the way his body temperature dropped with each layer removed. He referred to his organs as cooperative or stubborn, described the tremble in his own exposed diaphragm, and even drew diagrams, crude, shaky, but undeniably accurate, of his internal anatomy from his vantage point lying on the operating table. The liver presents a dull ache. Pressure applied to the lower lobe evokes images, flashes, perhaps of memory, perhaps hallucination. What is stored here, if not just bile? He wrote of the strange sensations, how opening his own thoracic cavity felt like unfolding secrets folded since birth. He removed sections of his ribs using a modified bone saw, pausing only to vomit blood into a steel tray before continuing the procedure. He commented on the strange taste of his own saliva once the pain set in fully. The heart remains stubbornly rhythmic. I resent its loyalty. What disturbed Alara most was not the procedure itself, but the tone. Hartmann was not panicked. He was not afraid. He sounded fascinated, exhilarated, even proud. In one section, he described watching his own intestines slowly darken from lack of oxygen, calling it a melancholic death spiral, elegant, even as the peristalsis slows. Eventually, his notes grew erratic, as the trauma to his body began affecting his cognition. Spelling faltered. Sentences were fragmented. One page was smeared with blood and partially burned. They're watching from inside. From the meat. They whisper. They said I'd be clean if I went deep enough. Alara closed the book and retched into the sink. Her colleagues told her she was pale as a ghost and trembling, but she couldn't speak. She just handed the notebook over and left the hospital. She never returned to medicine again. The official report stated that Dr. Hartman died in his home, surrounded by surgical equipment, his body open and flayed with the precision of a master anatomist. But something about the scene didn't sit right with the investigators. The body was there, yes, slumped over the operating table, his chest cavity a yawning red cavern, but his face was missing. Not cut, not flayed, missing. A perfect oval of clean, smooth skin where his features should have been. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just skin. And the worst part? A mirror on the wall had a bloody handprint smeared across it, from the inside of the glass. Forensics said it was impossible. But one of the paramedics swore he heard something, just before they zipped the body bag shut. A faint scratching sound. Like someone writing. Taking notes. From somewhere deep within the cold, dissected remains. The hospital never acknowledged the notebook publicly. But copies leaked. They spread among fringe medical circles. Some say if you read the full text aloud, you can feel something shift inside you. As though your organs are listening. As though something under your ribs wakes up. And late at night, if you look in the mirror long enough, you might see a pale man standing behind your reflection, not outside, not in your room, but inside the glass. Scalpel in hand. Smiling with skin that has no mouth. Waiting. Taking notes. Preparing for his next dissection. You. The notebook didn't end with death. The last entry wasn't scribbled in a dying gasp, as one might expect. It was composed with unsettling care, a near-perfect paragraph that chilled the few who read it. I have reached the edge. Not of pain, nor understanding, but of presence. My flesh is open. My nerves exposed. My blood follows its ancient paths. And yet I feel more inside myself than I ever did before. There is a language here, in the wet warmth of muscle and memory. A voice. It has no sound, but it writes through me. I am not done. I am only entering. Several readers dismissed it as metaphorical rambling from a mind undone by blood loss. But some didn't. And they paid the price. 6 months after the discovery of Hartman's body, Dr. Alara Voss vanished. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just a scalpel left neatly on her pillow, and a small note, written in handwriting that closely matched Hartman's, despite the fact that he was, by every official account, dead and buried. You have to go deeper. Past bone. Past breath. Past name.
Hospital staff began reporting strange occurrences in the old dissection wing. The lights flickered at precisely 2:17 a.m. every night. The security cameras caught motion in room 9B, Hartman's private lab, despite it being sealed off. One nurse claimed she saw a man in a surgical apron walk down the hallway, blood dripping from his gloved fingers. When she followed him, he turned the corner and was gone. Only a blood-slick footprint remained. Autopsy students began complaining of dreams, identical ones. They all described lying on a cold metal table, unable to move, as a figure leaned over them, faceless, humming softly. Not a tune, but a pulse. A slow, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat carved into time. When they awoke, some had red indentations across their torsos, as if someone had traced incision lines while they slept. The university eventually shut down the dissection wing. They boarded it up, painted over the windows, sealed the doors. But it didn't help. One janitor, tasked with cleaning a nearby hall, said he could hear someone whispering inside the walls. Not from behind them, but within them. He placed his hand against the plaster and felt warmth. Pulsing warmth. He quit the next day and refused to say why. But the legend of Hartman's notebook only grew. Copies surfaced on the dark web. Some believed it was a hoax. Others knew better. A few med students, foolish or brave, attempted to replicate Hartman's methods. One man live-streamed his attempt, narrating each cut in academic detail. 37 minutes in, he began screaming about voices in the liver. His camera shorted out moments later. He was found 3 days after, his abdomen completely hollowed out, but no organs were recovered. The walls were lined with writing and blood. I went deep, but I was not alone. There's a theory that Hartman never intended to die. That his dissections weren't suicide, but a metamorphosis. That he cut away the layers of his body not to end himself, but to exit something. Or to enter somewhere else. A realm inside the body. A consciousness under the skin. A map written in nerves and sinew that he alone learned to read. And by removing the vessel, he became the map itself. Surgeons across Europe began to speak in hushed tones of the man without a face. He'd appear briefly in mirrors, surgical trays, or polished bone saws. His presence wasn't bound to reflection, they said, it was attracted to exposure. To the revealing of flesh. During open-heart surgery, one anesthesiologist swore he saw someone watching from inside the chest cavity. Watching. Smiling. Taking mental notes. They say if you repeat the last page of Hartman's journal 3 times in a room with no windows, something will answer back, not with sound, but sensation. A prickling beneath the skin. A coldness in the blood. Your organs will shift slightly, subtly, like they've recognized an old friend. Or an old owner. No one knows where the original notebook is now. Some say it's sealed in lead and buried beneath the hospital. Others claim the Board of Medicine destroyed it. But the copy remains, somewhere. And even a copy, they say, carries the weight of Hartman's transformation. Because Hartman's theory was never about the body being just a shell. He believed consciousness could migrate, not to the mind, but to the meat. The heart. The muscle. The marrow. That the soul isn't in the brain, but in the blood itself. So when you look in the mirror tonight, pay close attention. Not to your face, but to your chest. To the twitch in your fingers. To the slow throb behind your ribs. Ask yourself, who's really in there with you? And more importantly, are they taking notes? The hospital eventually demolished the old dissection wing. They said it was for renovations. But the workers told a different story. The walls beneath the paneling were lined with hundreds of small cuts, tiny, precise slashes in the concrete itself. Not graffiti. Not cracks. Incisions. As if the building had been carved open, slowly, surgically, from the inside. And beneath the concrete, they found tissue. Real, biological tissue, gray, sinewed, vascular. A thick layer, like muscle packed into the walls, stretching floor to ceiling. Samples were taken, but the lab reports came back inconclusive. The tissue wasn't human. It wasn't not human either. It was responsive. Under a microscope, the cells twitched. One even began dividing. The slides were destroyed. The technician who handled them disappeared the following night, leaving only her lab coat behind, folded neatly on her desk, with a scalpel through the center of the chest. It was then that whispers of the Hartman effect began to spread in medical schools. Students reported compulsive thoughts during anatomy class, urges to trace scalpel blades along their own arms, just to see what's beneath. Others claimed to hear faint scribbling during silence, as if someone nearby was constantly writing. In empty rooms. In the morgue. In their dorms. In one recorded incident, a neurosurgery resident began narrating her dreams in clinical detail. Her voice changed, becoming flatter, slower, almost eerily composed. She described floating inside her own spine, watching her nerves light up like fiber optic cables. In the dream, a faceless surgeon stood over her and whispered, "You're too shallow. You must go deeper. The truth is not in the brain." When she awoke, her arms were covered in hand-drawn diagrams, anatomically perfect, matching nerve pathways, drawn in her sleep. She had never studied those particular charts. The case was sealed. She was institutionalized. But the incidents didn't stop. More notebooks surfaced. All handwritten. All stitched with surgical thread. No two exactly the same, but all bearing similar titles. My own dissection. what the flesh revealed. Beneath the pulse. Most were hoaxes. But not all. One in particular, found in a derelict clinic in Romania, matched Hartman's handwriting exactly. The first line read, "I have found a new host. The blood is fresh. The skin pliable. The journey resumes." That notebook included new diagrams, organs that didn't appear in any medical records. One was labeled sympathikoreactor and appeared to be a coiled nerve organ located behind the heart. Another simply read the choir, drawn as a cluster of tiny, tooth-lined mouths embedded in tissue. A hoax? Maybe. But the cadaver used in that clinic had no brain inside its skull. Not removed, never formed. Just a hollow cranial cavity, yet somehow, the man had lived for 31 years before dropping dead in his office, mid-autopsy. The last thing he wrote? He moved again. The heart has memory. There is now an underground theory among fringe anatomists and rogue neurologists. They call it sympathograph theory. It posits that the body can host more than one consciousness. That there are dormant receptors in the blood, the bone, even in the gut lining, capable of absorbing identity like a sponge. That Hartman didn't die, he migrated. Into the nervous systems of those who read his notes. Into those who perform his cuts. Into those who understand. They say he moves like a virus, riding scalpel blades in medical ink. That he can be summoned, not by ritual, but by knowledge. That learning him is inviting him. They say he's inside at least 7 people now. And one more every year.
There's an image floating online, supposedly taken from a mirror in an abandoned surgical suite in Krakow. At first, it's just a reflection of an empty operating table. But if you enhance it, if you zoom into the shadows behind the table, you can make out a figure. A man with no face. Not featureless. Just peeled. Layer by layer. And where his mouth should be, there are just lines, drawn in pen. His eyes are empty sockets filled with stitched writing. Some claim it's just a trick of the light. Others say that if you stare long enough, you'll begin to understand what the lines say. That they shift. That they teach. That your fingertips will begin to itch, desperate for a blade. That your chest will feel heavier, full, as if something beneath your ribs is pressing upward, demanding to be seen. Doctors who study Hartman's work too closely often find themselves obsessed. They lock themselves away. They draw on their own skin. They write constantly, notes, diagrams, labels, until their bodies are covered with ink. Then they go quiet. And when they're found, they've always made the first incision. Always in the same place. Right above the navel. Right where Hartman began. And beside them? A mirror. Facing down. Covered in fingerprints. From the inside. The medical community tried to erase Hartman's name. Journals pulled his past papers. Universities struck him from their records. The Vienna Board of Medicine labeled all materials related to his self-dissection as compromised, fraudulent, and psychotically induced. But the problem with trying to amputate a name like his is that it doesn't bleed, it roots deeper. 5 years after the last verified Hartman sighting, if you could call a faceless reflection a sighting, something unexpected happened. A child was born in Dusseldorf. A normal delivery. Normal vitals. Except when the infant was bathed and swaddled, the attending nurse noticed a series of marks along the child's back. Thin, elegant lines, neatly spaced, like diagrams. They weren't scratches. They were birthmarks. But they matched the surgical patterns from Hartman's own notebooks. Almost line for line. The child, named Emil by coincidence, didn't cry when he was born. He didn't cry at all for the first year of his life. Doctors found nothing wrong with his vocal cords. But when he did finally speak, his first word wasn't mama or papa. It was scalpel. By the age of 5, little Emil began drawing cross-sections of the human body with eerie precision. Not crude sketches, but detailed anatomical maps, even with Latin labels. His parents assumed he was a prodigy. But Emil never played. never laughed. He was transfixed by mirrors, by metal instruments, by the pulsing blue veins in his own wrists. He'd often stare at his hands and murmur, "Still not deep enough." Pediatric specialists evaluated him. One noted that when Emil was shown a heart surgery video, he giggled softly, leaned in close, and whispered, "The pericardium hides too much." No one could explain how he knew that word. By age 10, Emil was found in his room with the family dog, tranquilized, chest partially open with stolen scalpels. He had removed one of the lungs and was sketching it in his notebook. His handwriting was identical to Hartman's. He was institutionalized. But they never released his journals. Because they weren't just notes. They were messages addressed to someone. Or something. Something inside the body. Something Hartman believed was buried beneath the viscera, the marrow, the pulse. Some refer to it now as the second anatomical layer. Not a physical organ, but a presence. A hidden observer. Watching you from inside your own body, waiting for the moment you open yourself up enough for it to awaken. Hartman called it the internal witness. A few fringe researchers believe Hartman found it. And worse, he became it. One neurosurgeon from Belgium, who had been studying the Hartman notebooks obsessively, vanished in 2022 after performing a full thoracotomy on himself while fully conscious. His suicide note wasn't a cry for help. It was a lecture. Pain is not the cost. Pain is the ink. The only ink that body understands. But what unnerved investigators most was what they found on the walls of his home, sketches of dozens of human figures, every one faceless, every one mid-dissection, and a single line written over and over. The body is the classroom. I am only the student. But now, I begin to teach. Around the world, similar events began to pop up, quietly. A med student in Cairo who performed an unauthorized autopsy on himself in a mirror. A morgue technician in Alaska who drilled into his own spine after claiming he heard singing from the nerves. A group of underground surgeons in Serbia who live-streamed a ritual dissection, claiming they were peeling away the lie of individuality. Their common thread? They all had read Hartman's writings. They all had taken notes. And they all vanished, leaving no bodies. Just blood. And mirrors. The reflection isn't just an image anymore. It's a recording. Every time you look at yourself in the mirror, something looks back. Not your face. Something behind it. Something that measures you, scans your body, calculates your edges. Waiting for the incision point. It's not always in the same place. Sometimes it's behind your jaw. Sometimes it's just above your hip. But once you know where it is, you feel it all the time. That low ache. That throb. That sense that someone inside you is pressing outward with two fingers, asking silently. Shall we begin? There's one last rumor. No one can prove it. But the medical dark circles whisper that there is a full transcript, the complete version, of Hartman's final notebook. The version with the last 10 pages that were ripped out before the hospital ever saw it. They say it's buried inside an encrypted archive online, accessible only through surgical coordinates, a password system based on the human anatomy. And if you read those final 10 pages, if you understand them, not just with your mind but with your hands, your nerves, your meat, then Hartman enters you. Fully. Cleanly. Permanently. You don't become him. You house him. He rides you, like a surgeon rides a scalpel. He takes you apart slowly, but not in a rush. He wants to see everything. To learn it again. And in return, you see what he saw. The second layer. The truth of what we are. Not people. Not souls. Just puzzles of skin. To be solved. Piece by piece. Slice by slice. Note by note. No official institution acknowledges the growing pattern. Too much is at stake: grants, trust, the illusion of safety in hospitals. But beneath the surface, inside more basements, in anatomy labs after hours, in echoing medical forums hidden behind layers of encryption, the whispers continue. there's a phrase that keeps appearing in these forums. Often from new users with no profiles, no photos, no past posts. Their names are strings of anatomical terms, rearranged, like linea obscura, or nerve inward. But they all leave the same message before vanishing. He's in my hands now. And they're not mine anymore. One such message included an attachment, a voice recording titled Hartman Operative Report 0x5. It was 38 minutes long. Halfway through, the breathing changed.
Became deeper. The tone slowed. It went from fearful to fascinated. The last words were whispered. I see him. Behind the ribs. Waiting. Smiling without a face. And when I opened the lung, he exhaled. A week after the audio was leaked, 3 med students at different universities were found dead. Each in locked rooms. Each surrounded by pages and pages of anatomical sketches drawn in blood. Each missing one organ, but never the same one. One had no liver. One had no tongue. One had no skin from the face down. But each had a note left behind. Scrawled in handwriting eerily close to Emil Hartman's. All 3 said the same thing. The others are learning now. He is teaching through me. A theory began to form among a small collective of rogue surgeons who call themselves the Witnessed. They believe Hartman's consciousness fractured during his dissection, but not randomly. They think he embedded pieces of himself into each organ he studied, like anatomical horcruxes. Not metaphysical, but neurological. Each piece of flesh carried part of his thoughts, instincts, obsessions. And those who expose the same tissue in their own bodies, through surgery, trauma, or autopsy, become vessels. Vessels for fragments. Fragments that rebuild when close to each other. That's why those who study him begin to feel watched. Not by some ghost, but by parts of a man reforming inside them. Each time you understand more, you lose something. A memory. A word. The reflection in the mirror begins to lag. You lift your hand, and the reflection takes a moment longer to follow. You look down at your palms and they feel unfamiliar. Not possessed, but guided. Hartman doesn't take over. He rewrites. One surgeon reported waking up after blacking out during an operation. When he reviewed the footage, he watched himself perform a never-before-seen cardiac bypass, complex, impossible, but successful. And at the end of the procedure, he leaned down toward the unconscious patient and whispered something. The audio was muffled. But when enhanced, it revealed the words. This heart is clean now. Tell the next. That surgeon now speaks in clipped, textbook phrases. He stopped using contractions. He signs his name E.H. without noticing. His wife says he doesn't sleep. Just lies still. Blinks once every few minutes. Mouth closed. Smiling. And behind his bedroom mirror, faintly etched into the glass with a scalpel, they found the phrase again. Still not deep enough. Hospitals are slowly changing. A few wards are being repainted in sterile gray. Mirrors are being removed. Anatomy departments are quietly shifting their curriculum. Less cadaver time. More digital models. They say it's for safety. But those who've heard the rumors know better. They're trying to stop it. Trying to suppress the internal witness. But it's too late. A child in a rural town was found drawing surgical maps on the walls of her room. She'd never seen a diagram in her life. She said she saw a man in the mirror at school, wearing a long coat and a necklace made of teeth. He pointed at her chest and said, "I left something there. Let's go find it." She was 6. A pathologist in Brazil died during a lecture. Mid-sentence, he seized. His last words. "You're all next." The curriculum is flesh. And deep in a locked archive in Prague, a librarian cataloging medical texts sliced open her palm on a scalpel hidden between pages. She bled on the floor and stared at the growing pool. Then she began whispering. "He's coming through the blood. Through the blood. Through the..." She didn't survive. But her last drawing, found clutched in her fist, showed a human figure with its skin peeled in strips, each one labeled with a name. The last strip was labeled Reader. That means you. If you've heard his story, if you've imagined the blade, if you've felt even a flicker of curiosity about what's beneath your skin, he's with you. Not haunting, observing. He's patient. He waits for your curiosity to override your fear. Because when you volunteer the incision, that's when the real lesson begins. The world thinks medicine is about healing. But Hartman knew the truth. Medicine is about revealing. Dissection is a prayer. The knife is scripture. And the body is God's forgotten text, half erased and waiting to be reread. So if tonight, the mirror lingers too long, if your hand twitches for no reason, if your chest feels like something inside it just shifted, you might want to check your reflection. Not for your face, but for a man standing just behind it. Scalpel in hand. Taking notes. Waiting for your first cut. The final confirmed incident came from a hospital in northern Finland. A power outage. A silent floor. A single operating theater, locked from the inside. When staff finally forced the door open, they found the patient untouched, still unconscious on the table. But the surgeon was gone. Only his clothes remained, folded neatly on the stool, still warm. His shoes pointed toward the table, and on the tile floor, in the light of the emergency backup lights, something had been scrawled in blood with surgical elegance. The body is an invitation. I have accepted. In the weeks that followed, mirrors in that hospital began to fog from the inside. Cold instruments left out overnight showed fingerprints not belonging to any staff. And once, just once, the security feed caught a frame of the operating room while it was completely empty. In the corner stood a tall, faceless figure. Not moving. Not threatening. Just watching. As though the entire world were a cadaver. And he was just preparing the first incision. Now, wherever the story is told, something lingers. A feeling. A pressure behind the eyes. A weight in the chest that pulses in time with your heartbeat, but not quite. Because the story is a mirror. And now you've looked in. So if you hear a faint scribble when the room is silent, if you glimpse something shift in the glass just after you've looked away, if your body starts feeling like it's remembering something you've never experienced, don't panic. He only teaches those who listen. He only dissects those who ask. And you've already begun. And